This is episode 1 with Porter Stansberry. Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. Hello, my name is Mike Dillard, and welcome to the premiere episode for this Self-Made Man podcast. Now, before we join our guest today, I wanted to take a minute to share my vision and my mission for this project with you. You know, Self-Made Man was created as the answer to problems that I've observed over the past few years and that are impacting all of us, whether we like it or not, or know it or not, on a daily basis. And as I looked around the world, I saw the corruption in the financial markets that we experienced and started to see in 2008, the disintegration of the family, and the lack of leadership in Washington and in our school systems. I've watched citizen turn against citizen and country against country, and the core values that the United States was founded upon, such as honor, respect, and the rule of law, are no longer the norm, but unfortunately the exception. So the question that I had to ask really became obvious, which was, how can we change this? And the answer was simple. If you want to change the world that you live in, you must change the values held within the hearts of the men who inhabit it. You know, if a generation of children grows up without a family, without fathers who can provide discipline or successful role models who can provide inspiration, without knowing the difference between right or wrong or hard work or a handout, what kind of world will we have within 1 or 2 generations? Now, on the other hand, if you change a man, you change a couple. If you change a couple, you transform a family. If you transform a family, you impact a community. And if you impact a community, you uplift a nation, and if you uplift a nation, you can bring about change in the world. And my goal is simple, to provide men around the world with access to mentors who can give them the knowledge, wisdom, and leadership they need in order to fulfill your highest potential in every area of life, from business to relationships to health to finance and legacy. And we're accomplishing this mission through the Self-Made Man podcast, and with your support, we can literally change the lives of millions of men around the world. And, you know, while the message of this podcast is directed towards men, it is not exclusive to them. So as for the amazing women who are listening to this right now and who might be either feeling left out or wondering where you fit in, I'd like to speak directly to you for just a moment. You know, while the goal of this podcast is to empower guys and to fulfill their greatest potential, the simple truth of the matter is that we cannot do this without your help. You know, the biggest motivation that we have in the world to change and to improve as men is you. You are the reason behind everything we do in life, and you are the greatest opportunity that we have when it comes to our own personal growth. So your participation in Self-Made Man is not only important, but it's required, it's critical. And I would ask you to help us and to help me. And your first role that you have an opportunity to play here is that of a teacher. As you will discover in future episodes, I've been recruiting some of the smartest and most talented women that I know to contribute to Self-Made Man when it comes to relationships, love, health, and self-confidence. So we could use your help there. And your second role that you can play in this community is that of a supporter. If you have a man in your life that you love, whether it's your father, your brother, your husband, your son, or your friend, please, I ask you to share this information with them. Listen to these episodes with them, encourage and support them, because at the end of the day, the person who is going to benefit most from the change that Self-Made Man brings about is you. And with that being said, gentlemen, I bring it back to you. I'm going to ask you today to join me on this mission, to stand beside me as we set a new standard, not only for ourselves, but as a result, the world that we live in. I ask you to help me choose honesty over deceit, honor over fear, and freedom over tyranny. You know, most wonder whether or not one man can really make a difference in this world. Well, in my experience, it's that one man always makes the difference. And every single day, you and I have the opportunity to live that truth. So thank you for your leadership and for your support and your participation. And with that being said, I would like to introduce you to our very first guest, Mr. Porter Stansberry. Now, if you don't know who Porter is, he is the founder of Stansberry Research, the world's largest and most successful financial newsletter with over 500,000 customers around the world and annual revenues of $150 million plus. But I didn't bring him here today to talk about stocks or investing. He is here because he has become one of my primary role models over the past few years when it comes to building a successful business that is founded on a set of values which are becoming increasingly rare today. He's here because he's one of the few people in the world who's willing to speak very bluntly about the problems that our society is facing and how to solve them. And he is here today because what I have learned from him when it comes to being a husband and raising a family is having a huge and profound and positive impact on my life. And I want to share him and his wisdom here with you. So please welcome Mr. Porter Stansberry. All right, everybody, welcome. This is Mike Dillard with Mr. Porter Stansberry. Hi, Porter.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, brother. Thank you so much for joining us here today on the very first episode of the Self-Made Man Show. I am unbelievably grateful that you're willing to spend the time with us today, and am really looking for it.
Hold on, I didn't know this was the premiere episode. I don't feel like I'm very worthy of that.
I happen to feel differently, so I'm super excited, and there's a reason that I wanted to have you on this very first show, because I've been a longtime student of yours for the past 4 or 5 years and everything that you've been doing over at Stansberry. But I've also been a huge fan and a huge listener of what you and Aaron Brabham have done with your podcast over the last year and a half. And I listen to it religiously, and one of the things that I have enjoyed most about it, and the reason that you were my number one choice for this episode, is that you have the best understanding that I've ever come across from a very common sense standpoint of why this country specifically is going through the challenges that it's going through, why different socioeconomic groups are not having the kind of success that they want. And I believe that we both have a similar view as to the reason, why we're in the situation that we're in. And you have some fantastic ideas that are real solutions to these problems, but more importantly, real solutions and a real guideline for the folks who are listening to the show who just want to live the best life that they can from a business perspective, an investing perspective, and a family perspective. So I'm really excited that you get to share your words of wisdom with this audience, and they're going to absolutely love it. So, all right. And if we could start real quick, I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about your story as an entrepreneur. I've heard bits and pieces of it before. It's fascinating, but what I've always found most valuable is that there's little gems and pieces of wisdom that I've heard you share in the past that have allowed you to build the successful company that Stansberry has become. And what's most impressive to me is the length of time that it's been around now, 10, 15 years, where most companies will see success, for 2 or 3 years, and then they'll bomb out. You guys have just continued to grow and to grow and to grow. And I believe that there are some fundamental reasons behind that you might be willing to share today.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to, Mike. From where I sit, I would tell you that most of the success we've had, quite honestly, has just sort of been accidental in a way. And I'm not trying to be falsely modest, but if you had told me 15 years ago that the business that I started on a borrowed laptop computer in my kitchen table while I was living in a third floor walk-up apartment in Baltimore's most notorious slum, would end up being a $150 million a year plus revenues company with 200 employees and customers in 150 countries, I would have thought that you were completely insane. And so I want to give some kudos and some inspiration to folks who are starting out with very small efforts. What's the Chinese saying about every great journey starts with a single step? And if you have taken it upon yourself to begin your own business efforts, I want to pat you on the back and give you some applause and tell you that it can be by far the most rewarding thing you've ever done in your life. And with me, my story is very simple. I was a very poorly paid junior analyst with a very poorly run research and publishing company. It was called Welt Research. It was down in Florida. We really didn't know what we were doing from a sales and marketing standpoint at all. We had a very strange business model. Our primary customers were libraries. So it was a very
growing market.
Yeah, like I said, the person running the business did not have enough experience to be running it, and it was kind of a bad situation. And I think a lot of people would have quit, and I didn't. I stayed. because I was learning and I thought I would be able to use the information I was getting and the experience I was getting in some way that would be useful. So long story short, one of our very few clients, Bill Bonner, decided to buy the business. And Bill knew a lot more about sales and marketing than the folks who've been running Welt Research. And there were two people that in that business, me and Steve Sugarud. Bill fired everybody else and brought us to Baltimore and gave us a chance to write large circulation newsletters. About 2 years after that, I had a personality conflict with one of my supervisors at Agora Inc., and I was fired. And, frankly, I don't really blame him very much because I wasn't a very good employee in the sense that I really didn't like being told what to do. So I had my own ideas, and he said, if you think you're so smart, why don't you go build your own business? So that's what I did. And just to reiterate, I had less than nothing. I was 26 years old. I didn't have any kind of connections in the publishing world or in finance, really. I was good at writing stories. I'd always been a writer even since I was a little kid. And I had a borrowed laptop. And I think the reason why I got off the ground at all was because I did know a lot about finance. I had worked very hard during college and in my early career to learn my trade. And I definitely had a passion to help my customers. And a lot of the people in finance only have a passion to enrich themselves. And I think that my honest passion to help people understand investing and to do better in their own accounts came through in all of our messages. And that same positive desire to genuinely help my customer also attracted a lot of very high quality, high character people to my banner. And that's really been our greatest secret. I remember Jeff Clark, who is a pretty famous options trader. He came to me and said, I want to work with you, Porter. I didn't have to recruit him. He came to me. And I said, Jeff, you're 20 years older than me. You've had your own brokerage firm for 20 years. Why would you want to quit doing that and come work for me as a publisher? And he said, because you're the only investment publisher I know out there, and I read them all, who does an annual report card and who insists on transparency and accountability from his analysts. And I want to work for an organization like that because I think I can succeed with you. And so just little things like that, Mike, and most of the things we do as a business, the first question we ask is this something that we would be proud to show our parents? Is this something that we would want our friends and neighbors to read and to follow? Is this a person that I can really trust, respect, admire, and want to be more like if we're going to hire somebody? We sort of start with our business decisions from using questions that I'm not sure other businesses follow. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe every entrepreneur is like that. But my experience is most business people ask, how is this going to help my company make more money? And really, truly, that's one of the very last questions we ask. Obviously, we're not a charity and we do want to make money. But we think the best way to make money, call us old-fashioned, we think the best way to make money is by doing the right things for our customers and by always trying to hire the highest quality people we can in terms of character. That's just what we've done. We've hired lots of people that didn't have any real experience, but they had great character. They're the kind of people that you'd want to have as your friends and your neighbors. And a couple of tests that I like to use about that is, if you were stuck in an airport for 5 hours with this person, right? Would you be happy about that, or would you be miserable about that? And don't hire anybody you don't want to get stuck in an airport for 5 hours with. And if you just make decisions like that, my belief is that things will go well for your business.
Where did you learn these principles or these values growing up? Was it from mentors that you've like Bill, or was it your parents?
I think it was a mix of things. Definitely, I had great parents. I'm sure you don't know this, but I was adopted by my father. My biological father died in Vietnam. My father, Frank Stansberry, who adopted my brother and I, he married a woman with 2 small children. And I think it takes a special kind of man to make a decision like that. He was definitely a very powerful role model to me. He is a man of impeachable ethics and character. And I saw that by doing the right thing, my dad didn't always get ahead in life, but he always went to sleep as a very happy and satisfied man. And so I saw that. Definitely that made a huge impact on me. But also, I can't explain it, Mike. I was always very influenced by the people that were in my world, by other peers of mine. But I had enough self-confidence that I only wanted to be like the people that I admired. So just for example, I met Steve Sugarud when I was 12 years old. Steve, for those of you who aren't familiar with my businesses, are probably our most well-known writer. He's absolutely brilliant in finance. He graduated from college when he was 19. He's kind of like Doogie Howser. He got a PhD by the time he was 21. And by the time he was 23 or 24 years old, he was running a very large global mutual fund. And so here I am, I'm still in college, and one of my best friends growing up is running a major mutual fund as a 24-year-old. And going back to when we were 12 years old, Steve Sugarud was a guy I really wanted to be like. And Steve did well in school, and Steve didn't do drugs, and Steve was a good athlete, and Steve was popular with the girls, and Steve did cool things like surfing. And he was just kind of a guy that I wanted to be like. And I've sort of always done that in my life. I've picked people that I admired, and I've tried to be more like them, and tried to develop relationships with them. And I don't know really where the wisdom to do that came from. I don't know. It's just, I just found it, that's just what was satisfying to me. I didn't want to go hang out with a bunch of people that were doing stupid things and who I thought were not going to get very good results in life.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's actually a very similar outlook that I've had as well. And it's one of the inspirations to start this podcast, to give, the audience and really anybody out there who wants to, pursue their, highest level of prosperity or greatness out there, the opportunity to learn from and look up to and count the folks that are on the show like yourself, as people that they can learn from and grow from. So that's a very, very similar outlook that I've had as well. And, one of the things that I think is overlooked these days, specifically from a business standpoint, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs who are going to be hearing this, is the difference between, what is the word that I'm looking for? Getting the reward now versus putting it off for later. And you talk about this often from a reference point of savings and investing. But it looks like you've applied that to your business as well. And I remember, one of the times that I've heard your story, how you used to save half of your income, even when you were basically dead broke and, living in the slums. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
I am certainly not the world's best person when it comes to denying myself the pleasures of wealth. I really enjoy living life as good as I can afford. Big fan of private aviation. I own and maintain a boat that most people would call a yacht.
A very profitable adventure at that, I hear.
No, it's disastrous, of course. In fact, when people ask me about my estate planning techniques, Porter, do you have trusts for your children? How do you manage your estate issues as you're become a very wealthy man? And I always say, well, that's easy. I bought a boat. There's no more estate problem after that because all the excess cash goes right into the damn water. But what most people don't realize is that I have always, my entire life, I have always saved 50% of my after-tax income. And my belief is that after I have done that, I don't have to worry at all about how I spend my money. I don't care. I can spend it on anything I want, and it doesn't matter how frivolous it seems to anybody else, because I have already been a steward of my wealth. I have already put aside half of what I have earned for the year. And that's just the formula that worked for me. And I don't know if it'll work for you. I think for some people, that will probably seem like, believe it or not, too much spending. Some people just don't enjoy spending. They regret every dollar that leaves their hand. And I know people like that very well. And it's not logical, but it's what it makes them happy. I have a business partner, Bill Bonner, that flew coach, long after he was worth more than $100 million. And that kind of thing isn't enjoyable for me. I wanted to work hard and succeed so that I could give my family a great standard of living and so that I could enjoy myself. And I'm not ashamed of it, as you know. And I'm also probably, I think that the way that I enjoy food and wine and experiences is actually part of my leadership style. People know that if they come to a meeting and I'm there, it's going to have the best food, the best wine, and be held at the best place. People know that if I ask them for a business favor, I can and will pay them back in spades, whether it's letting them fly on a plane or letting them use my yacht. So being a guy that's seen as gregarious and high living also has some advantages. But the big problem is there are so many people, as you know, Mike, that want to put the cart before the horse. They want to live the life of the global publisher long before they even have a single subscriber, and that just doesn't work. You will never get anywhere in life until you learn how to delay gratification and until you learn how to save. And I would tell you that the only way to be successful at delaying gratification and saving is to see those things that you can't do as being the first rung in the ladder to being able to do them. So if you want to have your own plane, you want to have your own boat, you want to have your own company, the first rung in that ladder is not going out with your buddies and spending all your money on beers and good times. And that is, if you think of it if you think of that as an accomplishment that leads to your goal, it becomes very easy to be much more disciplined.
Did you ever have any kind of, or do you currently have any kind of system around, the saving the 50%? Meaning, did you put it in a different bank account or different bank? And the reason that I ask is, whenever I attempt to do something, and so I have a separate bank account that I have at Wells Fargo, and it's my investing fund basically, and the money that I'm saving goes into that for future investment. The challenge is if we're ever running short on revenue from a business standpoint, or something, an opportunity comes up that I want to take advantage of, it's one click away to transfer funds from that account to the other account, and poof, it's gone. And so I found that the only way that I've been successful at really accumulating wealth is to get it a degree away from me, maybe into a completely different bank where I don't have a check card available, I don't have a checking book available. Or have you just had the discipline to be able to have it sit there and accumulate, or do you put it out of reach, or how do you actually go about doing that?
Mike, I can resist anything but temptation. I have the exact same issues. When I try to quote unquote save money by putting into my brokerage account, I end up trading it into oblivion. It's funny that as a financial writer, I am a terrible short-term trader. And maybe about 5 years ago, I finally learned that would never, ever be a way for me to earn wealth. I had to make long-term investments in businesses that I understand very, very well. And the best option for me is private deals. Private deals are not liquid, and I typically can exhibit a lot more control in a private situation than I can in a public situation. But I don't want to give an answer that isn't useful for most people, because most people don't have the opportunity to do private investing. In fact, I would tell you that 99% of the time, the opportunity to invest in your neighbor's private development deal will end in disaster. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage people actually not to do that until they find themselves with a crew of opportunities that are backed by extremely well-financed, extremely experienced business people. When a Doug Casey or a Bill Bonner or a Steve Sugar comes to you and says, "Hey, I found a real estate deal, you should put some money into it," the answer is yes. But those guys have been doing it for 30 years, and they care way more about the reputation than they care about that deal. So if the deal goes bad, they will find some way to make it up to me.
Right. And
that's just not the case in most private deals. But that's the number one option I have. I can get better valuations. I can get better management. I have better opportunities in private deals. And the upside is there's really no liquidity until some kind of a transaction. So that keeps me away from it. The other thing that I have found that really works for me is putting money into gold every year. And this is not something that I think most people would feel comfortable with, because most people don't have the understanding of what gold is. Most people haven't spent 25 years of their life studying it like I have. Most people just aren't as comfortable with it as I am. But I'm very convinced, because of our government's financing policies, that gold is a very safe way for me to store the value of what I have earned. I don't expect for gold to make me rich. I only expect for it to protect my purchasing power. So at the end of every year, I just take whatever cash I have left in my checking account and I put it all into gold. And then I put that gold in a vault, and I've never sold a single ounce. It's a pain in the butt to sell, which is good. It keeps me from touching that store of wealth. And that to me is a very satisfying thing to do. To know that I have put away a tremendous amount of purchasing power is very, very satisfying. If you've ever been broke, you just don't ever want to be broke again. And every time I put $100 grand or 200 grand or whatever into gold, it just feels fantastic to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing I do, and this is by far the largest amount of my wealth, is stored in very well run, very conservative operating businesses. And I try to buy one good business a year. This doesn't really conform with any of the asset planning strategies that you will get taught if you go to see a broker or if you have an MBA. This will sound very harebrained, but it works for me. I'm very involved in the study of businesses and investing. It's what I do through my company. It's what I've done my whole life. I feel like I'm very good at analyzing businesses and knowing what they're worth. And Mike, I know you were at our Spring Editors Conference, and I gave a couple of presentations that talk about the intricacies of some accounting issues. I juxtaposed Amazon.com, which I said was vastly too expensive, versus another technology distribution company. And I don't know if you followed any of those things, but I thought that was a great demonstration of what I do and the value I give to our subscribers. And I use those same skills for my own savings. But I'm not allowed to write about the stocks that I buy. So I limit myself to only one investment a year because
Right.
I want to give my customers all of my best ideas and 99% of my work effort. But I save one stock for myself and my family each year. And I never, ever allow myself to sell it. And so once I have committed, it's usually $1 million a year. And once I've committed that $1 million to that business, then I just save it. And I don't ever trade it. And that works very well for me. And of course, everything I've bought over time hasn't been a winner. But by doing one stock a year, I'm diversifying over time. And my results have been outstanding doing that. It's funny, if you limit yourself to only one investment a year, you spend a lot of time making sure it's the right investment. And I definitely would recommend that people think that way, even if they don't actually only make one investment. Don't ever, in my opinion, don't ever buy a stock unless you are planning to own it forever. And just by having that mindset, you're going to make much, much better decisions.
Fascinating. Yeah, and I would love to have an entire discussion. Maybe we can get you on here again in the future just to strictly talk about investing. Because obviously I could sit here and learn from you for hours on this topic. But I wanted to switch gears just a little bit here and talk about something that I believe you and I are both passionate about, which is the challenges that we see this country going through right now. And I wanted to hear from you what you think the biggest challenges are and then what the root cause is versus the symptom, which I believe is what most people tend to point the finger at.
Okay, I think I have a pretty unusual mindset about that. I think we have a fundamental governance problem in the United States. And that is people are allowed to vote for things and policies without suffering any of the consequences of their choices. So look, for example, at the congressional district in Detroit. Man, it's early in my memory is so bad about names. John, I can't remember the name of the congressman right now. So this is a bad example, but we'll go to another one. But the point is they've had to redistrict this guy. He's the second oldest serving member of Congress, and they've had to redistrict him 3 different times because the people he has, the communities he has represented since the 1960s have been literally destroyed. So if you go to where his original congressional district, it's now pasture land because no one lives there anymore. And this is in downtown Detroit. And so, he wasn't responsible for any of the consequences of his choices as a leader in Congress. And they just redrew his district to give it more people. And the election results are Putin-esque, right? I mean, he always wins with 85% of the vote or more. And there are hundreds of congressional districts that are gerrymandered in this way. And that it creates a mockery of democracy. It's people believe that America is a democracy, but they're absolutely fooling themselves. Our democracy has been completely hijacked by special interest groups, and they essentially pay people to vote for them, whether it's paying them with single issue politics or whether it's paying them with actual cash benefits. So now more than half of the voters pay nothing in taxes. And when you have a society where your basic governance choices don't have any consequences, your whole country is going to run off the rails. So I think it starts. I think that's a big part of the problem, but it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. How do you say that we don't have any accountability in politics? We don't have a true democracy. But at the same time, say our society, there's tons of people in our community who think it's okay to live at the expense of their neighbors. Far from being shamed about being on welfare or being on food stamps, you see there's an entire industry that's built around getting people Social Security benefits they don't deserve, right? How many of those lawyers have you seen on television advertising that they can get you a disability package, regardless of whether you're disabled or not? They'll pay you for having depression, Mike.
Right.
I mean, what in the world happened to America as the land of the rugged individualist? And
exactly. So that's the heart of what I see it as well. So is this simply a generational decay, such as the rich self-made billionaire who then trusts down his money to his children, who then get spoiled and go party, Paris Hilton style, and then their kids, by the time it's gone, within 2 generations the money's gone, right?
No, I don't think that's true, Mike. I really don't. I certainly don't think that there are enough wealthy families that you would cause an entire societal change just by inheritance.
Well,
listen, you and I, I'm sure both know plenty of people whose lives were wrecked because their parents gave them too much stuff or too much money or whatever. But that's not. I don't think that's what's wrecking our country. That's just what's wrecking a certain small amount of really stupid families.
Well, yeah, I was referring to the decay of values over 1 to 2 generations.
I got it, but I think the expressions of this lack of value is what we see in our political system. It's what we see in our communities, right, where all the kids have to win trophies and grade inflation and all the degradation of the standards that community expects. And by the way, I would say the same thing in general about divorce, right? I mean, 50 years ago, divorce was a scarlet letter socially. People couldn't get better jobs if they got divorced. People were ostracized if they got divorced. Today, nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. It's like you can get divorced over the internet and no one even notices or cares.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think the root of it, this is just my opinion, but I think the root of it goes back to, and this is, again, everyone's going to think this is harebrained, but I think actually the root of it goes all the way back to a change that was made in our country in the late 60s, early 70s, whereby we decided that we wanted to have a far more elastic currency, and so we got off the gold standard. And what that meant was that the banking system was now able to create its own reserves. So the Fed could print reserves, and that allowed banks to lend money where there were no savings. And that fundamental shift, the fundamental idea that you can have capital investment without savings, the fundamental idea that you can have wealth without savings, that changes societies in profound ways. And historically, when you study it, that kind of credit inflation always leads to a degradation of morals. It always leads to a degradation of work ethic. It always leads to a degradation of civic values. And it always leads to a rise of gambling and speculation. And if you look and you see what's happened in America over the last, 45 years, those are all the things that you see. And so I think what's happened is because we have been able to add so much debt, America has gone from having total debt in its economy of around 100% of GDP. And that level was basically flat for our entire history with the exception of spikes around the Civil War, World War I, World War II. We have basically had a debt level which matched our size of our economy, which makes sense, right? How else did we get the money to lend it? So there was a healthy balance between work, savings, and investment. And then in the early 70s, we said, oh, you know what? We can. There's a better way. We can grow faster. We can be better if we just create our own banking reserves. And now we have debts that are equal to 450% of GDP. And these debts are financed with inflation and with investments from foreigners. And it's taught Americans that they can have a high standard of living without work. And that is absolutely, of course, fundamentally wrong. It is not sustainable, and it will lead to a collapse at some point. And if I knew when, I'd be a lot richer.
Yeah, it's interesting how that those facts and that wisdom has made its way through our circles specifically, in a very big way, starting in 2008, when it became much more apparent to the world that we have real issues here. And yet I'm shocked that we've lasted this long, as far as the stock market goes and gold prices go and all of that fun stuff. It's very interesting. And this is a thought I'd love your feedback on. And, you study past economic cycles and big trends. And is there going to be a difference this time? Maybe not in the end result, but along the timing, with the fact that this is the very first time we're going through such a massive economic cycle. In the fourth turning aspect, this would be the 100-year winter cycle, where we've actually had the type of technology that we have today, which has never been present before, where literally those who have the power can control many aspects of the market today. What are your thoughts on that?
Mike, you're more of a technology guy than I am. People probably would be surprised to know this, but I still read paper newspapers. I'm the old man in the office. I can just never make any of it work. I grew up programming computers and I used to know a lot about them, but it's just all left me behind. It's a very interesting question, whether or not technology and vast increases of productivity can solve our country's problems. And I would tell you that my answer, having thought about it a long time, is no. And that's not because the technology is not massive and powerful, and it absolutely is. Look at the growth, to talk about a huge underlying matter of great importance. Look at the role technology has played in petroleum and the oil business. And, you're in Texas, I'm sure you see it every day. The increase of onshore lower 48 oil and gas in the United States is absolutely stunning. People do not understand the impact of it even now. We've doubled our production we've more than doubled our production of liquid hydrocarbons. We've doubled our production of crude oil. And the growth rate is not slowing down. And we've gone from 4 to 5 million barrels a day to 9 million barrels a day. We're very close to a new all-time U.S. high in production. This is the exact opposite of what all the experts were predicting 10 years ago. Note that I was not one of them. I always believed that oil production would increase because of technology. And it's changing the world. This could bankrupt Saudi Arabia. This could make the Middle East something that we don't have to care about anymore. This could make the dollar the strongest currency in the world again. This could give the U.S. government a $1 trillion a year revenue boost, because a lot of the oil is owned on land by the Interior Department, and they get royalties. Not to mention just all the other benefits of more economic activity, because energy is cheaper. And this is all because of technology. This is incredibly important. But there's a big fly in the ointment, Mike, and that is if you study the link between productivity and incomes in the United States, you will discover that in the early 1970s, that link, which used to be one of the tightest in all of macroeconomics, so throughout the history of our country, wages and income were very closely correlated to productivity. And if you think about it, that just makes sense. If the workers are more productive, then the capitalists can pay them more and earn a higher return by doing so. And so it is completely natural that productivity should be linked to wages and income. But in the 70s, it stopped. And the reason why it stopped is because every time the Fed prints new banking reserves, they decrease the purchasing power of those wages. And no matter how powerful technology has been, and no matter how much productivity has continued to increase, and it has, the Fed has been far more powerful. And again, if you think about it, that also makes sense, because look at the number and size of bailouts that they have been dealing with. They've printed $4 trillion in the last 5 years, and even huge increases of productivity are not going to keep pace with that. It's like trying to fill up a bathtub when you have a huge hole in the bottom of it. So I really do believe that we're not going to see stability in our country's economy until we can fix the most basic issues of how our economy works. And those revolve around the currency and the banking system. And unfortunately, those are the most important valued political prizes. And anytime a politician even speaks about trying to change any of those things, he gets run off the scene. Look at what happened to Ron Paul when it looked like he might win the Republican nomination. The major media simply stopped mentioning his name. I don't know if you remember that from the last the presidential election. I guess it was in 2008.
He was polling it at a significant level, and they just simply chose to ignore him intentionally.
Right, they couldn't invite him. And he wanted to audit the Fed, as you recall. I mean, he was directly challenging. I don't want to call it conspiracy, but he was challenging the power structure whereby the banks and the Fed work together to assure their own survival. And that's one of the third rails in Washington. You cannot mess with the Fed. So anyway, I'm optimistic about technology, but I'm very skeptical that we can fill the tub as long as we continue to print money excessively.
Yeah, well, call me a pessimist, but my personal expectation is just based off what I've watched and seen and read, from a humanities standpoint is, I take basically the words and pages of Atlas Shrugged as not a piece of fiction, but a history lesson. And essentially to the point where if you sat down with all of Congress and all of the leadership in this country and said, okay, here's exactly what we need to do in order to fix the problems that we have, it would never get done because the pain point, from what I can tell, has to reach a level to where it impacts, the everyday common man in such a way that they're basically willing to pick up pitchforks before there is a fundamental transformation and kind of a reset in society, which is really what's portrayed in Atlas. And so I don't know if you agree with that or not, but given that fact, the one thing that we can control is, I can't control what the government does at this point, or the Fed, but I can control what, the choices that I make in my life, which can, definitely provide a different type of lifestyle compared to the society as a whole. What are your thoughts on that?
The only problem with that view is that it just doesn't comport with the stretch of human history. We have had plenty of reckonings. We have had the Great Depression. We have had tons of unbelievably bad decision making. We've had the Vietnam War. We had Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, which destroyed Detroit. We have continuing racism. But now I think racism has become inverted. Racism has become something that I believe is destroying the Black community because the racists are all still on the Black side of the ledger. Which is a controversial view, but it's one I believe is accurate. The people exploiting Black people are their own leaders. Mm. We have terrible policies in place. I mean, the estate tax is a horrendous violation of common sense, logic, fairness, justice. It's horrible. Likewise, all the government power that has been accumulated, the militarization of the local police forces, the NSA, the CIA spying on Americans, the absurdity of trying to make ISIS seem like it is a threat to American sovereignty. It's just, all these problems that people point to, Ebola, whatever, the world is always filled with problems and with mismanagement and with completely evil bastards. And yet, think about how much better the life that my children have today is than the life I had in the early 1970s. There is no doubt that in practical terms, the lifestyle of most Americans is greatly improved. I mean, quote unquote, poor people have cars and air conditioning and lawnmowers and washing machines. I think that somehow or another, Americans still, that we might go all the way to the precipice, but we don't jump. And somehow, some way, we find a way around shooting ourselves in the foot. And I feel very confident that we'll continue to do that for a very long time. Maybe it's just naive optimism. But if I really believed that the world was going the way of Atlas Shrugged, I would have far more money in gold and guns than I do in operating businesses. And that's not the case by a wide margin. I've probably got 10% of my net worth in gold and guns, but I've got 90% of my net worth in operating businesses that, frankly, none of which would do very well at all if the world was heading into a black hole.
Yes, very good. And, you've had an unbelievable amount of optimism as well, which you touched on a few minutes ago regarding the new potential, from an oil standpoint that is going to give the United States as well, which I'm excited to see how that plays out, coming here into the next decade or two. And with that in mind, we've got a bunch of entrepreneurs that are going to be listening to this. My goal for this is a bunch of men around the world who really want to become leaders in their own right and of their own families. Could you share a little bit about the way that you approach family and approach raising your two boys and the values that you're teaching them? I'd love to learn a little bit about that.
Well, let's start with the fact that I don't beat them with a switch. Oh, what a horrifying story. I mean, oh my God, I have a 3-year-old, and I can't imagine stuffing his mouth full of leaves and beating him with a stick. I mean, I just can't.
Where is that from?
Oh, it's from that NFL player who pled guilty to beating his children. The Vikings guy. I can't remember people's names. I don't know the details, but the story was horrific. I'm a lucky man. I adore my wife. I dated her for 5 years, and I asked her to marry me 6 different times, and I feel like I'm the luckiest man in the world. I don't think there are many people that get to marry the woman that they sort of idolized. When I tell people I marry out of my league, I think they think I'm kidding or it's a joke, but I really didn't. I married the person that I wish I was more like more than anyone in the world. She's just an amazing human being, and she happens to be really very attractive, which is a fantastic combination. So, she's just the most important thing in my life, and I make all of the decisions starting with what's going to be best for her. And I think if you love your spouse that much, you're setting a great example for your boys, and you're setting a great example for your peers in the workplace, and you have a steady foundation through which to go through life. And if you think about it, just from a business standpoint, what's your most important partnership? It's not even the people that you work with every day. It's the person you sleep with every night. And so for me, a solid life starts with your spouse. And I know this is a very difficult issue for a lot of people. Unfortunately, I know that most people don't have very good marriages. I tell you, Mike, there isn't anything that I can't talk to my wife about. I talk to her about every single thing in my life, my business, my faults, my struggles, my successes. And I think if I didn't have that person, I wouldn't be successful as a businessman, and I wouldn't be successful as a father. And then just to be more, a little bit more detail about how I raise my children, I think the most important thing you give your children is time. And I think the worst thing you can give them is money. So I spend an hour every night reading to my son, my 7-year-old Traveler. We've read the entire Hobbit. We've read the entire Lord of the Rings, and we're about halfway through all the Harry Potter books. And his vocabulary is amazing as a result, and he loves to read. And, spending an hour every night with your 7-year-old is not a commitment that I believe most fathers make. And listen, I do other things too. I pitch baseballs to him. We go on adventures on our farm. We do all the other father and son stuff. But the hour reading every night is a never skip. It's part of our daily activity. And as soon as his brother is a little bit older, he'll join into that. And so that's the most important thing, right? Give your children your time. And if you do that, they're going to end up adopting your patterns in life and your values, and they're gonna be fond of you. And if you just give them money, you're going to corrupt them, and they're going to see very clearly that you don't really care about them.
That's super powerful. And what you've got the hour a day that you've spent reading with him. What other, I guess, parts of your routine, from a family perspective and or a business perspective on a daily basis, do you feel are really critical pieces to your success? Do you have some daily habits that you dive into?
That's really easy. I probably spend more time reading than any other employee I have. I probably spend more time reading than anyone I know. And I've done that. It's funny because I was talking about reading with Traveler. I have always read 2 or 3 hours every day my whole life. I don't like watching television, and I really enjoy spending time quietly and by myself, which is funny because, I do have a big personality and I am very gregarious. But, if I go to a meeting or I'm around a lot of people or whatever, I need to go back to my room and spend an hour or two recharging just by reading. And I read everything. I read newspapers, I read magazines, I read blogs, I read books. Generally speaking, I read at least a book a week. And I don't necessarily read every word. I don't want to mislead people, but most books are not worth reading every word. But I do love to read, and it gives me a tremendous edge over my competition because I'm just more familiar with ideas. And especially as a writer, if you want to learn how to write, you have to read all the time because that reading, it's hard to explain unless you spent, thousands of hours reading. For good writing, there is a way that it sounds in your mind when you read it. And unless you are so familiar with how it should sound in your head, you're never going to be able to produce it with your pen.
I'd refer to that as flow.
Yeah, that's it.
And I totally agree with you. I mean, that's how I learned to write copy was by constantly reading other people's sales pieces. And I used to, when I was in my mid-20s, 25, 26 years old, and making my first attempt at becoming an entrepreneur, and I understood the power of learning how to write copy, I would literally lay down in my bathroom at night after waiting tables and grab a sales letter of somebody else that I'd printed off online in a notebook and a pen, and I would just write out the sales piece by hand. And you start to internalize the rhythm that a sales piece has, and the psychology of the writer, and essentially the flow to, now I haven't read a copywriting book in probably 5 or 6 years, but I can just sit down and I have that entire process internalized, and it just comes out. And as far as the reading thing goes, it's interesting. That is a connection that I made around the same time as well, where I realized the more that I read and the more that I learned, the more money that I made. And it was a very true connection to the point where on average, I probably spend, at least 150 grand a year on books, courses, and seminars and other items. And the more that I find that I spend on those things, the more money that I end up making.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the downfall of being a reader and being a guy like me, I prefer to learn independently. I would much rather be in a room by myself learning than have I have, believe it or not, because you've seen me at my own meetings where I'm very gregarious and outgoing. I have a tremendous amount of social anxiety. I do not like going into a crowded room where I don't know everybody. I do not like having to call someone on the phone. For me, there's a tremendous personal preference for learning via reading and via my own research. But I will tell you this, and I know it's true. 10 minutes speaking to someone who is an expert in the field you're trying to understand is worth 10 hours of reading. So the mastermind level is when you can build a base of information by reading, but then you take the time to either attend a meeting or to call a friend of a friend or to find some way of speaking to someone who really knows how to do what you're trying to do. And that's the warp speed, if you will, if you're a Star Trek geek. I mean, the amazing difference between speaking to someone who really knows something and trying to learn about it on your own is just incomparable.
Agreed. And I was very grateful for the email that I sent you about a month ago when I asked for a little bit of advice about an investment decision I was making, and it was unbelievably valuable to me. And if I had read 5 books on the topic, I still would not have gained the wisdom or insight from that simple email that you sent in return. What are we're coming up to the top of the hour here, and I would love to leave the listeners with some really solid pieces of actionable kind of takeaway advice from you when it comes to the principles or the values. And we've touched upon a lot of these over the last hour. But what are the core things where if you were going to sit down and tell your son, and maybe he's 18 years old, at this point, and he's like, if you want to be a success over the long term, of your life, here are kind of the core tenets or pieces. If I could give you just kind of three three pieces to follow or to take away with you that if those were followed, success is almost a foregone conclusion at that point?
I think the first thing, if you're talking about, success is a very, very broad word. And just for the purposes of being useful, I like to focus on success in business because I think that's what people are more interested in. So the first thing I will tell and have told my sons about being successful in business is something that Warren Buffett writes about all the time, which is that when a business with a reputation for poor economics meets an entrepreneur with a reputation for success, it's always the business that will win. The most important thing about being successful in business is by being in a good business to start. And so that means don't get involved in businesses that have low margins, that require massive amounts of capital, that have tons of competition. Just don't do it. Don't swing for the very easiest pitches. Don't try to make your career in baseball, so to speak, by learning how to hit the 100-mile-an-hour fastball. And that's just, for me, just number one. And so many times when I talk to young entrepreneurs, the sad part is that I can see that their dream will never be realized because they never stopped and asked the first question, which is, what are the basic economics of this business? You talk about somebody, for example, Mike, I'm sure you've been in this position. You talk about somebody who wants to have a restaurant, and that's their dream. Mm. And there's nothing you can do to coach them to make them successful in the restaurant business. It's probably the toughest business I can think of in the United States.
Agreed.
So the answer to that is just don't do it, right? Don't get involved in that business. You want businesses that are scalable. You want businesses that don't require much in the way of capital. You want businesses that don't require much in the way of people. You want businesses that can be branded. And there are plenty of other opportunities out there where you can find a good business. So the number one thing is find a good business. That's the number one thing to be successful in business. The number two thing is do your very best to surround yourself with great people. You can overcome almost any mistake in business, but you can never overcome a rotten apple. You just can't. If you end up partnering with someone who is fundamentally greedy or short-sighted or doesn't, there's all kinds of ethical problems people can have. You're never going to overcome that. You have to surround yourself with great people. And then, it sounds simple, but it's really not. And that is, do your best to create space between your business and your competitors by being the business that focuses the most on its customers. A lot of times, businesses will focus inwardly. The business will be organized so that the owner only has to do the work he wants to do, or the business is organized so that the owner can take the vacation he wants to take, or the business is organized so that the owner, gets an extra percentage or two in profit margin. And you can do all those things, and you can do fine with that without running your business in that way. But if you really want to be the most successful, you'll be the guy who spends day and night figuring out how to treat his customers better than his competition.
Powerful. That's something that I haven't heard in a very long time, specifically in my arena, which is basically the solo online entrepreneur. Because that is such an amazing opportunity for folks these days to make that transition from maybe a corporate career, to self-employed. And it really is focused on lifestyle and revenue, is the first thing, the latest internet marketing gimmick, which might produce, $100,000 for you this month or the next month. But that's why, one of the first things that I wanted to point out at the beginning of this call is that is so special about your story is that there's something that you do that's different, that's allowed you to continually get more successful every year for 15 years. Versus the folks that come in and look at a shiny new little thing on Facebook advertising, and they're successful for 2 months, and the next year they're gone. So that's unbelievably valuable pieces of wisdom there. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciated the time with you, Mike. It's fun to sit down and reflect and think about how we got to where we are. And I started out the conversation by telling you that I would have never dreamed that I would have ended up with such a big operation. It wasn't my goal. My goal, honestly, when I started was just to find a way to support myself because I'd been fired and all I knew was writing about finance. So I didn't have really any other options. And I just I guess I did those things I just mentioned to you. I went into a business with great economics, and they got even better with the internet. And I surrounded myself with great people. You've met my staff, Mike Palmer, Steve Sugarud, some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. Definitely people you'd love to be stuck in an airport with.
Mm-hmm.
You learn a lot. And then we've always really had a big customer focus. And if you look at our refund policy, I always tell people I'm happy to part as friends at any time. You can always have your money back if you do business with me. And doing things like the report card, demonstrating actual tangible value that we gave you instead of just good intentions. And those are things that really set us apart, even from when we were a tiny company and had, nothing else going for us. So I know that it will work. I know that these ideas will work for any entrepreneur and any type of business.
One last question. Where do you see yourself? What is your vision for Porter's future 10 to 15 years, down the road from now?
Great question. We're actually in the middle of a very big corporate, not restructuring, that's not the right word, but maybe a recapitalization would be the proper way of explaining it. We're shuffling the ownership of my business in a way that is designed to empower some of my employees. And we're going to make a big move into asset management. We'd like to take the track record that we've established in the newsletter world, helping people make money via newsletters, and offer them more of a service-based business, whereby, for a relatively small fee, instead of having to read our newsletters, we'll just put their money in the stocks that we write about. It's a big change from a regulatory standpoint. There's a lot of things that we have to do to make this new business work, but it's the keys to success are exactly the same as the keys to success in our newsletter. So we're going to do things that most money managers won't do. For example, if we don't make you money, then we are not going to charge you any fees. And just little things like that to sort of set our
just little things.
Just to set ourselves apart as we've tried to do so from the beginning in our newsletter business. And obviously, there are far more people who would hire a money manager than there are people who are willing to read newsletters. So opportunity for us to go from being a good business to being a very, very big business over the next 10 years.
That's amazing. What kind of ETA do you guys have on the launch of that?
Our first investment product is most likely going to be a small hedge fund. And I say small because it'll be limited to 99 investors. So that'll probably be launching in the beginning of next year. But the big asset management business has to do with managed accounts. And to launch a managed accounts service requires, unfortunately, just tons and tons of legal work. And so we're targeting a launch sometime in mid 2015.
That is super exciting. I know you guys have been hinting and threatening to do that for the last year or two, so I'm super excited that you're actually going through with it. That's going to be amazing.
Well, it's really, really hard. It's so difficult, Mike, to get involved in a business that has so much overhead. You can't dip your toe in it. And I've always been a big believer in, ready, fire, aim,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to figure out how to make the business work as you get started in it. So start small. And you with asset management, there is no way to start small. It's all extremely expensive to launch. And so it's taken us a long time, and it's very difficult to launch a big capital business when you have no experience in it. And people don't understand. The asset management business has nothing to do with picking stocks. It has nothing to do with picking stocks. People are like, what are you talking about, Porter? You can manage money. You can pick stocks. I've seen you do it. Yeah, that has nothing to do with the asset management business, though. The asset management business is all about garnering assets. It's all about how do you market to get people to send you their investment accounts. And that is a whole different can of worms, a whole different skill set than what we have as financial analysts. And so finding the right people, getting all the right lawyers, it's been a very, very tough process.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited, and you can count me in as one of your first clients whenever the opportunity arises. It'd be amazing to be a part of that. So Porter, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your morning here to join us and spend the past hour with everybody on Self-Made Man. This has been amazing, and I'm very grateful for your knowledge today. And man, thank you so much.
Mike, it was my pleasure. I hope that you'll have me back on sometime. I loved speaking with you. You asked great questions, and it's fun to be around a guy who is so eager to learn.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely do that. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at your next event. And for everybody listening out there, all of the resources that we've talked about today and all of Porter's websites and his podcasts and everything will be listed in the show notes. So make sure you go check those out. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye, Mike.
Awesome, Porter. Thank you, man.